How's it going, everyone? My name is Casey Lamb. Today I'm going over my lab number 6 for my CS328 class over at the University of Nevada, Reno. In this lab, we developed a full top-down shooter game with 15 tutorials on where we built the character, enemies, and projectiles, created a system for enemy AI to chase the character, developed a system to spawn the enemies, and other mechanics that go into full level design. So let's get right into it. As you can see here, we had to create a flatbed and 4 different spawn points where the enemies will occur, and we put my character right in the middle. As you can see here, the camera top down run there, and then there's a camera up here, but you'll see why it's up there for soon. So let's jump right into the game. As we enter into the game, you can see the projectiles coming in, and you can see the enemy spawning in, and I just died. See the fire, game over, and now it's going to reload the level, saying reloading level. So, as you can see here, once the enemy gets hit, 3 different times. So 1, 2, 3, it'll explode. And from here, we can just cause different indications of like the character getting destroyed and just saying game over, and it'll reload the level. Ignore that, that's just indicating that there's too many things and it's trying to follow one certain character. So from here, how do we set up this? So in our level, we have to create a rotation mode to where our character and the controller are focused based onto the actual game itself. So our player control class is our rotation controller, and then our default pawn class is our rotation character. As we can see here, we can spec into all the stuff to actually indicate like how the character works in general. So from here, in our controller, we have 4 different areas of where the player is developing into. So our keyboard movement references into it, so we don't have to call into a pawn every time. Our mouse rotation, and then our firing mechanism for our projectile. So from here, we have to create project settings into our inputs to indicate our going up, down, left, and right, our WASD keys, to scale when we're going up, down, left, and right. And to fire our projectiles, we spec'd it into our left mouse button, so whenever I held it or pressed it multiple times, you can see the different delays of the actual projectile being spat out. And to cause different collision points, we had to create 3 different object channels to like either block or ignore, like to spec into like, oh, bullets being hit. From here, you can see that to reference the character, we had to create a different variable for our rotation character to actually call all of these to spec into where our character is in accordance to reference, where our character is to locate in our world space to our rotation to be able to hit enemies, and then where to fire out the projectiles in the case of the player reference in angles of the cone. So from here we can see our character. It's just a simple cone, but how did we get the top down portion into it? So we spec'd into a spring arm that's tied into a camera all the way up to look down at the player. And from here, we had to create our projectile spawn, so whenever we fired, it will actually hit into the world. In this spec, yeah. As I zoom in here, we have to find where the actor is to indicate where the rotation and where the bullet's gonna hit or gonna like spawn in, and try to get the location into it so we can make the transformation to like have the projectile go out from the character in the shape of that cone top. And from here we have damage into our player HP, which is set to 3. And from here we can actually indicate whenever the player is actually hit, in the case of our color scheme, our different color scheme, to offset everything to develop into, oh, the player got hit or the enemy got hit. I'll show the enemy in a little bit. The character got hit, where it'll hit like, oh, duration, so it shouldn't be hit again, so it shows a different color. And then once it's destroyed, it'll set a fire into an explosion to set where the character died, like exact location where the character died. From here we have our projectile. We have a material to indicate the different color into it, so we can offset the real world and the enemies from the world, the player enemy from the world, to hit the projectile. So from here we actually made a bullet into our into our projectile and made it that color. And from here, we have a little damage output, which is caused by 1. So from here, we can cause damage to whenever it hits and it hits an actor, so it can destroy upon where it is in the world. And from here, impact, you don't see the impact, but it's happening inside the enemy, so it'll burst a little green light, so green spark, to indicate that the projectile did hit, but we can't really see it because it hit into the block of our enemy. As you can see, our enemy class is just a square, a simple square with the capsule component inside. So whenever the enemy gets hit, it takes damage. And if we can spec it here, where it's the same thing as the player, except now it's hit points compared to the instead of HP. So hit points, so basically how many times you need to hit the character. And from there, once after, we can see it explode once the whole damage is outputted into the hitbox, the hit points. And enemy damaging player, so whenever it comes closer to the player, it'll damage the player. But how did we get all those enemies to chase the character? Well, we created a behavior tree, and we put it in our blackboard that it has to find the player position. So we had to create 2 more different settings into it to chase player and set player position. So from here, we had to run our behavior for our controller to take the assets from the behavior tree so it can run completely. And from here, we can chase the player, where it'll, like, once it finds where it is in the world, it'll start chasing the character. And then once the character is destroyed, it does not have an execute order to follow the character anymore. So that is the lab. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Later.